I am so excited to be here on this day. I know I was picking at it right before we got here. And that's a side it always shows when it really should show this side. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. Don't get distracted other than by our new book that we have. How right is rain? No, how large is God? That's what we are reading. We are so excited. We, as in me, and Lucy's pretty excited as well. March 24th, day 327. Thanks for joining me. What's up, Lucy? What's the matter? Look like a poop poop. We've got our bookmark already. It says books on it. If you remember, there's one of our bookmarks. I'm using so many of them because I always have a lot of books out. I've got one Reader's Digest I'm reading, a Reader's Digest here. I've got our science that we're reading. I've got our history book that I have one in. And now Chinese medicine. See, you can see. It's got one of them in. Let's start from the very beginning. How Large is God? Voices of Scientists and Theologians. This is an introduction from the editor. Now, in these books, just so that you know, what this is a scientific compilation is what it is. The articles are written, I believe, as summaries of their work, but it's their work that they're summarizing. So the only thing that John Marks Templeton has to do is write an introduction, get everybody, keep them on course, right, for writing this material so that he can get it published in a timely manner, and it's in somebody's hands like me who just eats this stuff up as if it were a steak, like as promised. Come on, honey, sit down. Look at. She's so happy today to be by me. This book, so again, an introduction by John Marks Templeton. The scientists in the book write their own chapters. He just puts them together and keeps them inspired and on course. This book, I hope, will help bring more people to the realization that we know very little, probably less than 1% of what can be discovered about God and fundamental spiritual principles. In recent years, scientific research has revealed that the universe is staggering in its immensity and intricacy. And some scientists are now suggesting that a much larger God than we previously had imagined may be its source. Those dumbbells. Yet, as a member of the Board of Trustees of Princeton Theological Seminary for 39 years, I gradually realized that most people, even highly trained theologians, seem to have various restricted views of who God is, and I don't know why she's whining. And what his purposes are in creating this amazing universe. Just in my lifetime, our knowledge in science and medicine has grown 100-fold. More than half the scientists who ever lived are alive today. Well, you know. More than half the discoveries in the natural sciences have been made just in this century. By scientists. Not by other people who have eyeballs. More than $1 billion every day worldwide is now spent on scientific research. Yeah, that was frightening to me. $1 billion every day. And most of it in scientific research, those dollars are given to the medical industry in the research. That's why they're so pompous. And it's wasted because they're not studying cures. And now they literally are saying it's not the cure we're interested in. We're interested in bacteria that communicates good and bad. Really? Really? Because you know what I feel like doing to that bad bacteria with my fingers, giving it the middle one. I didn't think you got it. Yet, as a member of the board, just in my lifetime, our knowledge in science and, all right, where I said it. Yet, by comparison, almost nothing is spent on spiritual research, despite the enormous benefits that might come from even 1/10 that amount invested in research for spiritual information about meaning and purpose and the invisible realities. For this reason, 25 years, invisible because that's not what you're studying in science. You're like, oh, in order, you have to keep it observational so everybody could see. Well, you know what? When you're hiding everything, you dirty dogs, because I can't say the word I want to say. It's Lent. Began to be awarded annually to emphasize the benefits of spiritual progress. 8 of the recipients have been scientists or scholars interested in increasing spiritual information through science. More recently, my colleagues and I began many new projects to further the goal of increasing spiritual information and research. All right, loosey-goosey, quiet. Sit down. Roar yourself. Hey. All right, stop. You're getting very loud. Sit down. Sit. I said sit, and don't be. No. Don't you bark at me. Sit down. Don't whine at me. You're too loud. You know, I wouldn't have to get this way if that bark wasn't ear-piercing, and it is. Now sit down in your basket. Sit. Sit down, I said. Sit down in your basket right now, or I'll put you in the bedroom. Sit. Who do you think I'm talking to? Get in there. You bark in my face when I get on you, I'll bark in your face. Sit down and stop. Okay. They're on my face. Sit down in your basket. Don't you start. You let that dog play. Yet by comparison, almost nothing is spent. All right, I just read that. For this reason, 25 years ago, the Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion, a cash prize larger than the Nobel Prize, I'll take that, thank you, began to be awarded annually. I'll take it for the last how many years? To emphasize the benefits of spiritual progress. 8 of the recipients have been scientists or scholars interested in increasing spiritual information through science. More recently, my colleagues and I began many new projects to further the goal. Sit down. Sit down. Of increasing spiritual information and research. In 1987, we established the John Templeton Foundation, the central aim of which is for humanity to gain the benefits of new spiritual information through science. The crucial ingredient in this research program to bring scientists and theologians and others to work together is called humility theology. Now that's beautiful. I'm looking for, we've got a couple things here. And now you can also begin to see what a scientific summary of work looks like. It looks like it's filled with conclusions and data, none of which was Andrew Wakefield's, by the way, paper. It wasn't a book. It wasn't conclusions filled with data. It was one study. Now, he may have thought more about that one study, and he's allowed to. Two things to highlight here. That and more than $1 billion every day worldwide is spent on ridiculous science in what we are reading, an economy of poisons that is supported by literature from other cultures. Why would our culture be writing on that? A description of this initiative follows and serves as an introduction to these 9 essays by some of the scientists and theologians who have been our advisors in these early years of the development of the Foundation's program. Humility theology. At the time of the organization of the first Templeton Foundation in 1987, we proposed the idea of a theology of humility. This concept came about through the recognition that the sciences in these past few decades, at least, have opened our vision to realities invisible and intangible in a universe that is so vast and complex that our view of ourselves and our Creator would seem to need a searching reassessment. Talk about an old-fashioned view when you think about, the Dark Ages and Catholicism. But, I also don't know how they change the language, for sure. The theology of humility as formulated for the bylaws of the Foundation emphasize that, number 1, it is centered in an infinite God. Number 2, it encourages creativity and progress. Number 3, it recognizes diversity and constant change as hallmarks of our universe. Number 4, it encourages research into spiritual subjects such as love, prayer, and thanksgiving, and what might be seen as a kind of experimental theology. Scholarship seems so often to be associated with pride. Knowing more than someone else has seemed for many intelligent people to be almost more important than the acquisition of knowledge itself. This tendency of the human ego has been especially destructive to progress in our information about God. The founding prophets of the great religions often took an exclusive view of their knowledge of God. They assumed that there was little new to be learned and that their audience could comprehend and remember only limited spiritual information. And that is so egotistical, isn't it? Filled with arrogance, immodesty, a lack of humility. It is just a bombardment of our spiritual impotence. In that sentence, they argued that there was little new to be learned and that their audience could comprehend and remember only limited spiritual information. Is that what you thought? Is that the reason for those perverted plays that everyone turned into big giant jokes? Is it feeling like deja vu? Research has often been backward-looking, focusing on the ancient foundations instead of the future. In an interview with the publication Second Opinion in July 1993, I was asked why none of the great religions seems ready to experiment with openness. I responded, the main restraining influence has been and is personal ego, the concept that we are the center. For countless ages, various people thought that the earth was flat because it looks flat. For countless ages, various people have thought that the sun revolved around the earth because it looks that way. For countless ages, people have thought that their God was the only true God. The Jews were not the only ones to think they were the chosen people. And the human ego has, in effect, said that God is understandable. Human ego has led most religions, I'm talking about forgotten religions, to say that they had the whole truth. They knew the mysteries. Now, astronomy has defeated human ego. We no longer think we are very important in 100 billion galaxies. I would like to see that happen in our knowledge of God. I don't think we know much more about God than we knew about the 100 billion galaxies 2,000 years ago. Why would we? God is the creator of those galaxies. If we don't know about his creation, how could we know him any better? Examination of the bylaws. The first emphasis in the bylaws statement of the John Templeton Foundation reads, centered in an infinite God. So we said that, number 1. The theology of humility means we know so little and need to learn so much, and to devote resources to research. The theology of humility is not man-centered, but God-centered. And now, if you see that I didn't read this full introduction. Last week, I decided I was going to do our early birds on modesty and humility. I probably decided that in this class, I think. I wrote it down. It was from one of the classes, but not early birds. Then I wrote it down, and this morning we did modesty and humility. And here we are, 3 hours later, talking about it, reading about it. Now, it may be my first time. I don't think it is my first time, but that doesn't matter. This is showing you how he works. Now, you could say, well, it's part of her memory, and she's recalling it, making associations like, the scientific a-hole that we're going to be talking about throughout. Okay. The theology of humility is not man-centered, but God-centered. It proposes that the infinite God may not be describable adequately in human words and concepts, and may not be limited by human rationality. But I don't think that's 100% true either. And that is because if you describe straight from the Bible, God is love, then you will come across a concept of God that is understandable in human terms. If you take Jesus's 2 main commandments, to love God and to love your enemy as yourself, then you do get a human capacity to understand God. You don't have to put a religious concept on it though, right? You don't have to put a religious name on it, because that's competition. And it is also, just as he states, inspiring of one true religions, right? When we don't even together cumulatively have a 1% understanding of who God is. It proposes that, there we go, all right. Perhaps God is not limited by our 5 senses, and he's not, clearly he's not. We already talked about him in a spiritual world. So that is God 101. He is not limited by our 5 senses. We know that. And our perceptions of 3 dimensions in space and 1 dimension in time. Perhaps there is no absolute beginning and there will be no absolute end, but only everlasting change and variety in the unlimited purposes, freedom, and creativity of God. That is so beautiful, right? That is so beautiful. The unlimited, only everlasting change and variety in unlimited purposes, freedom, and creativity of God. So here we see a mess and chaos. We see lies and misrepresentation. And it is one small part of God's purpose, freedom, and creativity. I'm not going to take the charge, but right there I would have filled in the blank with an MF word, as if God were saying it to the rest of the world. Purpose, freedom, and creativity. I'm God, by the way. Maybe God is all of time and space and much more. Of course he is. He created time and space. But have an appreciation for the questions and the way that John Marks Templeton is getting your brain ready. We call it a schema in psychology, getting your schema ready for beginning to make giant paradigm shifts in how you think of God. This is America 101, so they're giant paradigm shifts for us, likely not for most other cultures. The appearance of humankind on this planet may be said to have heralded the coming of a new quality encircling the earth, the sphere of the intellect. Then, as we have used our intellects to investigate the mysterious universe, accumulating knowledge at an ever-increasing rate, there has come a growing awareness that material things are not what they seem, that maybe thoughts are more real and lasting than matter and energy. So again, paradigm shifts. If my thoughts are more lasting than matter and energy, then my thoughts will evolve into another body. Easily. That is so comprehensible, isn't it? But a giant paradigm shift for Christians. And that's exactly what I was going to say about material things as well. The appearance of humankind on this planet may be said to have heralded the coming of a new quality encircling the earth, the sphere of intellect. And this focus and concentration on eyes up, eyeballs up. Get your eyeballs to heaven. Get your eyeballs raised up to God instead of dissecting his work. You will no faster lose God than a scientist dissecting his work, right? Of course. It is mass, what's the opposite of sacred? Sacrilegious. But that just does not have the oomph it really needs to in a scientific mind. Oh, is it sacrilegious, you Lulu bin from way back? Perhaps this heralds a new quality, the sphere of the spirit. So we have intellect and spirit. God may be creating not only the infinitely large, but also the infinitely small, not only the outward, but also the inward, not only the tangible, but also the intangible. Of course, thoughts, mind, soul, wisdom, love, originality, inspiration, and enthusiasm may be little manifestations of a creator who is omniscient, omnipotent, eternal, and infinite. And those are just concepts that completely escape capitalism. Those are concepts that completely escape people who are mining this earth and seeing no other way. Thoughts, mind, soul, wisdom, love, originality, inspiration, and enthusiasm may be, all of that is driven by an omniscient, omnipotent, eternal, and infinite God. So shut up, sit down, and relax. Watch him work. Watch him work. Does he take pleasure in watching us manifest his qualities? Of course he does. So take the time to adore your God by manifesting his qualities. Are we speaking Greek? This is just because it sounds beautiful to me. It sounds like a harp. The things that we see, hear, and touch may be only appearances. They may be only manifestations of underlying forces, including spiritual forces, which may persist throughout all the transient and physical existence. Perhaps the spiritual world and the benevolent creator whom it reflects may be the only reality. Presumably, the sphere of the spirit may enclose not only this planet, but the entire universe, and so God is all of nature. nature and is inseparable from it. Perhaps it is mankind's own ego which leads us to think that we are at the center of a vast universe of being which subsists in an eternal and infinite reality which some call God. Maybe all of nature is only a transient wave on the ocean of all that God eternally is. Maybe time, space, and energy provide no limit to the being which God is. Likewise, the fundamental parameters of the universe, the speed of light, the force of gravitation, the weak and strong nuclear forces, and electromagnetism would seem to pose no limits to the being which is God. Okay, and here we see that what he's doing is he listed the 4 theological points of what all of this work is about. It is centered in an infinite God. And then that's what he just got done actually reciting from their foundation. All right, so what I just ended up ending with is the last statement of their statement in the foundation of this work that explains point number 1. It is centered in an infinite God. Okay? These ideas with the focus on the infinity and magnificence of God and of his inseparability from all that has been made may be illustrated by the following tentative propositions for future research. So now he's going into points number 1 through 6 on that. So he's writing, this is no longer part of their foundational quote I was reading. All right. So number 1, further future research. Number 1, maybe nothing can be separate from God. Of course not, except for maybe the things that are man-made. I don't, right? I mean, because we made material things because we fear there is not a God as he is describing, a benevolent creator, right? Maybe the great religions which descended from Abraham, point number 2, have unconsciously overemphasized the visible and tangible aspects of fundamental reality. Number 3, maybe unconsciously these religions have overemphasized God as distant and separate. Number 4, maybe it is egotistical to think that any human ever understood even 1% of God. Number 5, maybe humanity is like a way, since the Bible says that, right? And he is creator of all things. And so, yeah, maybe we don't have more than this small, tiny concept of God. He said it in the Bible. That's what he gave us. Hello. Maybe humanity is, which is not a religion either. It's God's word. So 2 different things. Maybe humanity is like a wave on the ocean and God is like the ocean. But that's only another 1% of who God is, to think of him that vastly, right? That's still only 1% of who he is. Maybe it is self-centered for us to think that nowhere in the universe is there other life capable of thought. Even if only 1 star in a million has a planet in the same developmental stage as Earth, then there may be 100,000 other similar planets in our own Milky Way, not to mention the other 100 billion galaxies. Now, I am not a person who believes that. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible says all of this is for us. And if we want to understand it, if his children really want to get to know him, and he wants to get to know his children, he would not have us spread all over the universe. He would have us in one place, learning his lesson about it, that is inspired by our curiosity of what he made eyeballs up. Just like the astrologers who came from the East, who read the stars, because their eyeballs were up and knew that that the Savior was born. The second part of the description of humility theology is elaborated in the bylaws. And so now here is point number 2, and we are quoting from their bylaws again. All right? The theology of humility encourages change and progress. Science is revealing to us an exciting world in dynamic flux whose mechanisms are ever more baffling and staggering in their beauty and complexity. Scientists are learning to live and work with quantum uncertainty and complementarity, major discontinuities in evolution, and baffling complexity in cellular differentiation. I mean, those words are staggering and baffling, aren't they? But what I so appreciate is their emphasis on, when you see God's work, you emphasize their beauty and complexity, right? You aren't taking the poisons and capitalizing on them. That's baffling. Yet scientists have turned these and other discoveries into opportunities, and many scientists have expressed a new openness to philosophy and religious questions about life and the universe, most of them inspired by capitalist ideas. So if you're just a lab rat, you better rethink, lab ratish. While science has generally responded, and this is still their quote from their bylaws, while science has generally responded favorably to change, a long history of religion is filled with the failures of thousands of religions. Perhaps these religions disappeared partly because their conceptions of God were too small. Theology of humility proposes that maybe God is now providing new revelations in ways which go beyond any religion to those who welcome the originality of the creation and the continued surprises. And its continued surprises. For example, some theologians and scientists see an integration of the new discoveries of science with many religions' traditions, a new theology of science. Perhaps our human concepts of God are still tied to a previous century. The 21st century after Christ may well represent a new renaissance in human knowledge, a new embarkment into the concepts of the future. Persons now living can hardly imagine the small amount of knowledge and the limited concepts of the cosmos which man had when the scriptures of the 5 major religions were written. Perhaps old scriptures need new interpretations. The theology of humility seeks to build on the great theologies of the past and present and does not oppose any other theology. So I would have to say Buddhism, Confucius, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. That's my guess for the 5 major religions. They haven't said it. Perhaps old scriptures need new interpretation, or where we read that. It welcomes the ideas and inspiring literature of all religions, but perhaps we should be open to the possibility of various new unprecedented religions where the revolutions in our conceptions of time, space, and matter significantly shape our theology, perhaps while recognizing that God should not be thought of as impersonal. Our names for God should be less heavily focused on personhood, since their usage favors man-centered concepts. The Creator seems to be both transcendent and immanently accessible, both by science and by prayer, ready to transform the lives of those who invite him in. The theology of humility encourages thinking, which is open-minded, and conclusions which are qualified with the tentative word maybe. It encourages change and progress and does not resist any advance in the knowledge of God or of nature, but is always ready to rethink what is known and to revise the assumptions and preconceptions behind our knowledge. And that's exactly what we were talking about in the Bookless classroom relative to Andrew Wakefield's article and vaccinations, which, by God, why the hell are we still talking about this 45 years later? It is possible that and why haven't we learned something by now? It is possible that through the gift of free will, God allows us to participate in this ongoing creative process, which, by the way, all of it is in his hands anyway. He's not running around going, oh my gosh, they put Andrew Wakefield on the blacklist. Perhaps a prerequisite on our part is to look beyond our biases and our fears, our personal hopes and aspirations. This is all still part of the bylaws, their bylaws, to see the glorious planning and the infinite majesty of the planner. Maybe we should also ask ourselves whether we are students of the natural or the spiritual worlds. Are you scientists? Are you students? Let's start there. Of the natural world and the spiritual world, then sit down and shut up. Get back to class. You're on the lowest class level according to India. To study and experience the ultimate relationships between physical and spiritual realities in our own lives. These ideas, with their emphasis on creativity and progress, may be illustrated by the following tentative propositions. Number one, maybe it is egotistical to think that progress in religion is not necessary or not possible. Maybe it is self-centered. Number two, maybe it is self-centered to believe that we stand at the end rather than the beginning of God's creative process. Number three, maybe it is self-centered to think that we are approaching an omega point rather than ever increasing diversity beyond imagination. Maybe an evolutionary process without purpose could not create humans dominated by purpose. Maybe God is only just beginning to create the universe and allows each of his children to participate in small ways in this creative evolution. Number six, maybe progress in religion could be more rapid if we could avoid words like belief and think and faith and use instead words like evidence, test, research, probable, and empirical. They use those words, they misuse them and abuse those words. But I hear you. The third point, this is what I believe, right? That's what he's saying. And then here we go. Out of the bylaws, back to John Templeton. The third point of humility theology statement in the bylaws is as follows. And now we're quoting from the bylaw on diversity and constant change. The theology of humility does not encourage synchronism, but rather an understanding of the benefits of diversity. Constant change would seem to be the character of our universe. Despite the cycles of the day and night and the seasons, we may be learning that nothing really repeats. Well, I don't know about that. The pattern that unfolds with time may not close back upon itself. Maybe it moves ahead, upward, a little at each turn. Okay, the evolution of our universe would seem to be vast in its conception, yet curiously experimental and tentative, a truly creative work in progress. Perhaps human beings, so late in appearance in this evolutionary process, have been given some creative role in seeking to understand and interpret awesome and mysterious processes which science only now begins to fathom. We suppose that our part might be likewise to conceptualize and experiment over a wide diversity of possibilities in the physical and spiritual worlds. In the physical world, perhaps we should re-examine the arrow of time. Thermodynamics has tended to provide a picture of irreversible movement from order to randomness as the universe runs down. But this is the antithesis of what appears to happen in the evolution of the universe and of life. It is as though apparently self-integrated units of the simplest matter exhibit powers which successfully oppose the trend to randomness and produce instead orderly events and structures. Where man-made structures decay, natural systems seem driven toward growth and toward greater diversity and complexity. Here perhaps we have one of the greater laws describing the nature of the cosmos. If only blind chance were involved in evolution, we might expect decay and disorder. Yet the end product of evolution up to this point is a conscious being endowed with a remarkable brain and dominated by the purpose of the Creator. In the spiritual world, perhaps diversity is also reflected in the variety of the religions and in the multiplicity of denominations. It may be that this increasing diversity provides for a freedom and a loving and healthy competition without which there might be only lesser progress. Perhaps we should applaud the new research programs and the new organizations arising in each of the world's religions, provided that they are not sacrilegious, that they are not unsanctified. These characteristics of diversity and change may be illustrated by the following tentative propositions. Number one, maybe God is the reality behind all the things seen and the vastly greater abundance of things unseen. Well, of course. Number two, space, time, matter, and energy are a few of the creations or aspects of God that humans are able to comprehend. I don't think that we can comprehend time, matter, but not really, not in the way God understands it, like forward, backward. Do you have second chance? Absolutely. That's the upward spiral that he's talking about on a different level of comprehension, right? He's saying we don't repeat, but he's saying we don't repeat everything. I could see us repeating till we get that upward spiral, but that's a slow process, which is okay as long as we don't see criminality winning, right? Which I don't think they are. Maybe maybe the awesome mysteries of magnetism, gravity, light, knowledge, imagination, memory, love, faith, gratitude, and joy are all part of God, and he is much more. Maybe humans who dwell, well, since he says that, pretty much so, maybe humans, I mean with the big maybe over here, you know what I'm saying? Maybe humans who dwell in 3 dimensions can comprehend only a little part of God's magnitude of dimensions. I think he leaves it for us to be able to comprehend, not fully, because we have a selfish aspect, but we are losing our sense of self or selfishness. I believe. Those words he said not to use. The 4th part of the bylaws description and humility theology reads, that one sentence left the last bylaws, we're into the 4th bylaws. These are the 4th for the introduction, the last. Encouraging progress. The theology of humility does not rely on man-made institutions or governments, nor does it seek to influence them. And this sounds very JW-ish. Perhaps one of the greatest developments in human history has been the increasing possibility for the freedom of each individual to learn and grow and develop. The theology of humility seeks to improve the human condition by internal and spiritual sources rather than by external human governments or institutions. It encourages worship of the Creator rather than dependence upon government, and spiritual growth rather than human social and political activities. The theology of humility suggests that tremendous benefits could accrue from our greater knowledge of spiritual subjects such as love, prayer, meditation, thanksgiving, giving, forgiving, and surrender to the divine will. And this actually is the bridge here about the 3 days on, 4 days off. We don't mind producing things that are good, because that is our demonstration of what we've learned and our adoration for God's gifts, I think. The theology of humility suggests that tremendous benefits could accrue from, we already said that. It further suggests that since science is opening our eyes to the vast works of an infinite creator, science may also be applied to varieties of experimental and statistical study of these spiritual entities. It may be that we shall see the beginning of a new age of experimental theology, wherein studies may reveal, and this has always been my dream as well, that there are spiritual laws, universal principles which operate in the spiritual domain, just as some natural laws function in the physical realm. Perhaps we will discover that the sphere of the spirit is intensifying as God's evolving plans unfold and accelerate. Perhaps research foundations and religious institutions should devote vast resources and manpower to these scientific studies in the spiritual realm, equal or greater in magnitude to those currently expanded on studies in the physical realm, and ruining people's lives and finding the necessity for population control, or any kind of control that we can get our hands on. Economic control, lawyer control, drug control, any of it. just disgusting, just absolutely diabolical. There could be enormous rewards in terms of increased human peace, harmony, happiness, and productivity. And who are those you-know-whats who don't want that? If we collected more evidence that the God of the universe has put us here on this planet to learn and challenge each other, and to act as channels to radiate God's love, wisdom, and joy. These characteristics of humility theology may be illustrated by the following tentative propositions. Number one, maybe civilization cannot neglect the humble seeking for God and his purposes. Number two, maybe children cannot be prepared for life by schooling in knowledge that has only a material emphasis. Number three, could vast benefits of humanity result if we began allocating money and human resources for spiritual information and research as we now do for research in the sciences? Them and those SOBs and their STEM programs, right? Is it possible that the intellectual sphere is encompassed by a spiritual sphere, or that possibly spirit could be the underlying and original and continuing source of all creation? Number five, maybe we need a new branch of science about unseen spiritual principles, information, and research. And since I've been saying this, it would need to start with psychology or philosophy, and I really can't work in philosophy. Let me work in psychology. The most popular discipline at the universities, right? But here's my hopes and dreams, and this is 1997. The copyright is 1997. But as you can see, in order to put something like this together, which are summaries of their work, this work could be, it all is older than 1997, and some of it could be significantly older than 1997, since we haven't been listening for, millennia. Humility theology as a foundation for future research. I am enthusiastic about the possibilities for powerful new insights about meaning and purpose through empirical and statistical studies of spiritual subjects. In an earlier book with Robert Herman called Is God the Only Reality?, we spoke of the new opportunities through humility theology. When we come to appreciate all these limitations, the extremely thin veneer that is our, so here's the quote. The extremely thin veneer that is our knowledge of the universe, our limited perspective with respect to the breadth of reality and our own precarious place in the vast scheme of things, we might well expect a failure of nerve or a crisis of ego. But this is just the point where we ought to be if we are to experience humility. For the pride and self-esteem that our society so prizes and encourages is the very root of our problem, because it ignores our proper relationship to the Creator God, who is the life giver and the light giver. And our proper relationship is, we understand 1% of you, let me shut up and sit down. I'm a teacher. I'm showing his work through me, so I rarely shut up and sit down. 4 days off. No, I shut up and sit down more than I do this. In an earlier book, we had talked about the creator of the universe as the light giver who seeks to reveal himself in our universe through intricate design and purpose. And we have talked in this book about God as a life giver whose love and faithfulness are revealed in human freedom and natural law, chance and necessity working together to create a world of infinite variety and beauty, form set free to dance. That's so unbelievably beautiful. What does he do? He allows us to reveal human freedom and natural law, chance. He's got the chance DNA going on there to see what is created in a world of infinite variety and beauty. Form. His form is encompassed in laws. There are laws, but those laws are beyond our imagination. Most of them are beyond imagination. So the laws are set free to dance. We have been by chance. We have been struck with the remarkable contrast between ourselves, minute specks in one tiny star system in one of the smaller galaxies of the known universe, and God who brought all this into being. From this vantage point, we are impressed with the irony of statements by some small minority of scientists that their ideas of the universe might preclude the need for a creator. It seems rather like Joseph Bailey's parable of the rogue computer having a learned discussion about whether man exists. And we are also impressed with how other religions leaders insist that their interpretation of the truth of God excludes any alternatives. By this means, many who could begin the walk of faith are turned away. It is difficult not to see the strong element of pride and self-centeredness in both the atheistic scientist and the religious separatist. Both have excluded the possibility of other valid sources of truth. An attitude of humility would open their minds and hearts, freeing them to greater understanding. It would encourage a spirit of exploration, which for many potentially creative people is no longer considered an option. The arrogance of many scientists and religions, and that is true of this classroom. It would encourage a spirit of exploration, which for many potentially creative people is no longer considered an option. We're doing it. We're teaching the classroom. It's not an option any longer. This is what I have to do. It's not an option any longer. The arrogance of many scientists and religionists has led to the impression that everything is settled, that there are no frontiers left and no new worlds to conquer. Yet from what we have tried to share about the very limited degree of our present understanding in both science and religion, it should be evident that there is a whole universe to be explored. We have barely scratched the surface. In biological science, for example, the burgeoning field of neuroscience and developmental genetics beckon with fascinating questions about the relationship between the mind and the brain and the developments of the embryo and the mechanisms of macroevolution. In theology, the relationship between mankind and the rest of the created order need fresh study in light of evidence of recency of our original and yet closeness of our relationship to the rest of the living things. Questions raised in behavior genetics and environmental science offer tremendous and exciting challenges for the students of religion. Scientists and theologians should see opportunity in a theology of humility to pool their resources and explore together the vast reaches of the universe. We take as our models those careful scientists who are not deluded by intellectual pride and who do not deny the metaphysical. Only arrogance would lead others to assert that what they cannot comprehend cannot exist. See Richard Dawkins. We see the opportunity for an integration of the disciplines of science and religion. The really paramount question about our nature and the meaning of our pilgrimage are strongly interdisciplinary. Already, science is demonstrating the fruitfulness of interdisciplinary studies in the relatively new field of neuroscience and the very new field of cognitive science. We forecast tremendous advances in human understanding when humble scientists and theologians meet together in joint interdisciplinary research in a kind of experimental theology. Now, again, we have to be prepared to respect the sacredness of the human being and not overstep our boundaries relative to our curiosity, right? What I'm saying is the cognitive science has unbelievable experiments, and they challenge the mind and thinking like no other science. Unlike neurosciences, which are trying to understand through dissection of the brain, and again, for many people, it is demonic that you would want to do that to a sacred life, human being, spirit, physical body, right? That you don't have enough comprehension outside of your physical world to have a little respect for other types of entities that you can't explain. you shouldn't disrespect them in such an appalling and unnatural way. Do you hear the habits you're creating for your brain? And once again, let me clarify the point here, and that is that cognitive science has unbelievably extraordinary experiments that demonstrate to a much greater extent in that we can generalize our findings to a much greater extent in cognitive science because they are imaginative experiments in mental imagery. Right? And mentalizing. Unbelievable. Like the experiments that we've done with people who have short-term memory, but still we have learned long-term memory because they are able to come back in and not start from the very beginning on drawing a star in a difficult task, right? Of doing it in a mirror. See what I'm saying? Those are cognitive science studies. They are off the charts, blow your mind what you can generalize with those kinds of studies in comparison to your dissecting a brain and looking at a blob, or you altering the chemistry of thinking people's brains like you do in the pharmaceutical industry. Just really just inhumane, unthinking, lack of critical thinking, demonstrating a lack of, like, barbaric. It's barbaric is what it is. It's barbaric, and that's a level of these research doctors. And when I say research doctors, who I mean is those people who are demanding this type of research be done. The future will be open to the scientific exploration of spiritual subjects such as love, prayer, meditation, and thanksgiving. This new exploration may reveal that there are spiritual laws, universal principles that operate in the spiritual domain, just as natural laws operate in the physical realm. Such an experimental theology would be God-centered, recognizing the inadequacy of our senses and our intellect to comprehend the Creator, yet realizing that God also manifests himself through a spiritual dimension that not only speaks to each of us personally, but seems to pervade the world we live in. Such an experimental theology will recognize that a new renaissance in human knowledge is coming, building on the powerful insights of the past with new data from the physical and human sciences. This future religious emphasis will encourage thinking that is open-minded and conclusions that are tentative, and not leave America in the dark ages for Pete's sake. Even as our universe has proved to be in constant change and progressive development, with this new sense of humility, focused on government. What a bunch of unthinking idiots. The way is now open to examine scientifically the spiritual nature of human beings. Instead, several researchers have already begun an extensive examination of religious variables in healthcare. Of special significance is the work of psychiatrist David Larson and his colleagues at National Institute of Healthcare Research in Rockville, Maryland, in revealing the extent to which religious commitment is ignored or mismeasured in clinical medicine, and the work of Herbert Benson, author of the best-selling book, The Relaxation Response. Benson, the director of Mind Body Medical Institute at Harvard Medical School, which is where I really started, with the book, which I've said, edited by Daniel Goleman, Mind Body Spirit book, on empathy. I called it On Empathy. Ugh. Where is that book? I gotta grab that book. That was the beginning of my search, my career. That was the beginning of my career. When I read that book, I said, adios, gender studies. And true that. And the New England Deaconess Hospital is conducting research into the relationship between spirituality and health that demonstrates that spiritual experience is correlated with increased life purpose and satisfaction, a health promoting attitude, and decreased frequency of medical symptoms. Perhaps the future will see research foundations and religious institutions devoting huge resources. Yeah, thanks a lot, research institutions and university. Brilliant mind on all this stuff. And here I am in this apartment. Nice job promoting what is good and what is right and what is lovely. And what is, come on, where's that one? I thought that was in our Alfred book. And our last one, which means where is it? Did I put it away? No, I didn't. Ugh! Because it's on one of my bookmarks, which I probably have over there. All right, let's get to it. How far are we in this? And we're still on our introduction. And the articles are much longer. We're here an hour. We just turned an hour. Okay, so let me see. Yeah, I still have 3 pages. So we're probably going to stop after this section. Questions raised in behavior, genetics, and environmental science offer tremendous and exciting challenges for the students of religion. So I'm sure oh wait, never mind. We're way over here. Perhaps the future will see research foundations and religious institutions devoting. Okay, this is what I said already. There would be great rewards in terms of increased human peace, harmony, happiness, and productivity as evidence accumulates that mankind's spiritual nature is the central aspect of our being. Hello. Finally, if reality excludes us because it is deeper and more profound than we can ever truly comprehend, then my brain is singing. I don't know about yours. Because it is an expression of the God of the universe, then it should be our finest goal to know God by every avenue open to us. Surely the best and most profound studies in all of history will come when performed humbly with the expectation of more fully knowing the Creator God and His purposes for His creatures. So we're going to stop right there for our introduction. We've been here in the classroom reading for an hour. So 9 experts, and you can see we haven't gotten through the introduction, which means it's going to take us longer than 9 days to get through each of this. This is that it itches there because of the histamine that's in there because it is infected. But almost all done with that infection though. But I do have to, but it does, boy, that does get into your brain and make your brain go a little bit. But it doesn't show when I'm reading such wonderful scientific work that is just written as if it was the pen of God making beautiful music on a book page. Dr. Annette Feravich, it is March 24th. It is day 327. Thanks so much for joining me here in the classroom where our 3 classes, early birds start at 9 o'clock. No, but 9. Bookless classroom number 2, that starts at 10:45. That one is a pretty big. And then the reading room, which is even a bigger, depending on the bookless classroom and what we got going, which a lot of times we are long in the early birds. And that gets us rolling on this weird time thing. Thanks so much for joining me here in the classroom where each of our 3 classrooms are doing what we can in the best way to raise your spiritual awareness so that your spirit is not only fulfilled, but so is your mind and your body. Thanks so much for joining me. Wrong.